Today, I'm going to talk about filtration. What? I have a point. I promise. This is my one of my little pet peeves slash passions. Okay. Uh, if you ever visit my place, you will notice that I have air filters. These One of them here is standing alone. There's a little bit of story that I'm going to go into about that. Uh, and I also have what's called a Berkey water filter, which is actually a survivalist device, not cheap, but uh, I think it's a 5 gallon drum that will filter water through gravity, so it's not powered, and that's you can use it for really filthy water in the case of some sort of true crisis where there's disease in your water supply or whatever. It's not how I use it, but I use it nevertheless because I want a nice, clean, filtered source of drinking water and cooking water. And so that thing, I refill it usually once a day with the amount of water I drink and with the amount of other stuff that I use it for. It goes pretty quickly um, because I have learned throughout my life that we are continually consuming things that have all sorts of impurities and additives and other stuff that that is not good for us. Okay, and it's not necessarily that the whole they're putting something in the water supply. True, they put fluoride in the water supply, and we're finally coming to terms with the fact that it's a neurotoxin and that was actually industry trying to figure out a way to dump their toxic chemicals. Hey, this is good for you, and putting it into the water instead of actually having to dispose of this stuff. Uh, you know, Robert Kennedy, Jr. A broken clock is right twice a day, right? About that particular subject. And I do not want fluoride in my water. I get plenty of fluoride in my toothpaste, and I do not need it in my body. Is how I look at it. Now, you'll get some interesting responses, which I suspect are not organic, from people like, "Oh no, filtering your water is a bad idea. It's bad for your teeth or whatever." Like, what? Why are you concerned about that? Because it's not. It's not. Pure water is better for you than non-pure water. That particular argument is predicated on the idea that there's minerals in water that if your teeth can have the minerals soaked out of them by completely clean water. I don't know if I buy that. Besides, you know what? That's the risk I'd rather take than all the junk that ends up getting filtered out. Okay, and what prompts this? Okay, so uh, a couple of years back, we bought some very expensive air filters to use in our house. And I found that my quality of life improved dramatically, particularly because I lived next to a bunch of trees. I've always had allergies, and I just kind of lived with it as just kind of a, you know, standard state of affairs. That my nose is always perpetually clogged. It's, always runny and, whatever. When we bought these things and activated them, after a day I was sleeping better, I was breathing better, I was just in generally just feeling a lot better because I could breathe better. And so I became a convert on air filtration with those things. And then that house, when I bought it, I had to replace the water tanks. And one of the things they kind of added as part of the throw in, maybe because they can't get rid of them, was an inline water filter for the house. Okay. And when that thing got installed, they had to prime it, they had to run all the water through it, and then allow the old water to flush out. And so we did it in the shower. And you could feel the difference between the water quality before the water changed over and before that new stuff started coming through the pipes. It was softer, it felt better, everything about this water smelled better. And that was part of what prompted me to do that, was that the water in Charlotte, especially where I was living down in Ballantyne, was extremely chlorinated. You would turn on your bath and it would smell like a swimming pool. And chlorine is good to put in the water supply because it kills microorganisms and all that other stuff, but it is not good for you to drink yourself. And you only want to take that in very moderate amounts. Nothing wrong with filtering it out after it's done its job. And the reason for that, particularly in that neighborhood, was because the water treatment plant is very close. And the way the plumber explained it to me is that what they're doing is when they dump that stuff into the water, they're not thinking about the concentration up close. They're talking about the concentration as far as it gets to the end of the final pipe, right? And there's all sorts of things that do get into the water supply as it's delivered. It's not a perfect system. And so the idea that the chlorine stays at a certain level of concentration at the end of the line is what their calculation is based on. And if it's not strong enough at the end of the line, they dump more in at the source. Makes sense, except when you're close to the source, you're getting a lot of chlorine, right? Um, and so just by nature of the fact that I lived close to the water treatment plant, it made sense to put that filter on the house. Now I didn't have it on the whole property. I don't care if the lawn gets some chlorine. I'm not that egalitarian, but I wanted the whole house to not have any chlorine, and the equipment lasted longer. Seals did not, fray and wear out on toilets and stuff like that they do, like they do. Everything just seemed in better shape because the water was clean. Okay. Now that was not a crazy filter. It was just more or less got, solids and, chemicals out of the water. And I also had a triple osmosis filter under the sink, which puts the water in a little tank. It slowly trickles in over time. And then that water is a special faucet that you use for cooking and stuff. And that water was extra pure. I don't know if you necessarily need to go to that level, but I enjoy it. I like that. I like the idea that this water is just water. Um, Now, with these fancy filters, this was the issue. They were very fancy. They had electronic components in the control panel. And in a previous video, you probably saw both of them as I was monkeying around with them. I actually had to post a video when I asked for support from these guys, because what happened was not one, but both. When I replaced the filters this most recent time, the control panel stopped working. I suspect it's a bad batch of their filters because everything in that device is connected in such a way that the electronics want to touch everything and get a register back to say that the device is put together correctly and it can fire up. And it was not getting that signal. I cleaned all the contacts, just monkeyed around with it quite a bit, asked their support for help, and they're like, sorry, we don't make that model anymore. It's out of support, so no help for you. And so, of course, I was like, okay, well, can I get a refund on the filters then if I can't get any support from you guys to fix this device? They're like, no, but we'll give you a discount on new filter. No, new. I'm not doing business with you if you're not going to work with me on this, because those devices themselves weren't that particularly cheap, and the filters are not cheap either. The swing to that is that you don't have to replace those filters very frequently. They have pre-filters and other things that get the big junk out of there, and it's really about getting the particulates out of the air. So I junked them. I happen to have these other, not as good of models, but they're good enough that I broke out of storage and have replaced them and got new filters ordered and cleaned them up. And they're going to work fine because they're simpler. The moral of that particular story is the simpler, the better when it comes to stuff like this. Like these things just have a couple settings of how high they go. They're not nearly as complicated as the other things were, less likely to fail. Because I had those things running constantly for years. But those particular devices, I always had some bit of trouble with them starting up and making sure they were all connected. And finally, they gave up the ghost, both of them at the same time, which leads me to believe that it's not just something broke, but it's faulty equipment. If two of them simultaneously that I bought at the same time, both failed at the same time. Anyway, um, but again, removing the particulates from the air in your general living space makes it much more pleasant. You're going to sleep better. You're going to, breathe better, all that other stuff. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get everything out of the air and, you got doors and everything else, but the majority of it coming out is going to have in my personal experience, a positive impact. Okay. And the same with your water. Now, I can't filter the water that's coming into this place. I live in an apartment. I don't know if you can even do that to a condo, putting an inline filter. I would do that if I could. But the Berkey device that I have as my emergency supply, right along with my bug out bag, you might be able to see it in the background there. The bug out bag is another thing that I have just in case. And it's got, high protein, bars and a bunch of, blanket stuff and all sorts of survival things that if something goes wrong, you can throw it in the car and go, and you've got something for it's about a week of survival in that bag, supposedly. And I replace those every 5 to 10 years, depending on what the shelf life of the stuff is in there, right? Always a good idea to have something like that. Yeah, it's better to have it and not need it than the other way around. Another thing that I have is an emergency radio. It's tuned in. I turned off the hurricane warning, the storm warning message. So the way those things work, and they're cheap. This one has a battery backup and a power, so it plugs into the power. And on the emergency channels, there's a particular signal that a pulse of some sort that the emergency channel will send that not only conveys text information like a pager, old pager technology would, but it also indicates what kind of warning it is, right? So it's an earthquake warning, it's a storm warning, it's a biological attack warning, like all these different categories, and you can turn on and off which ones it'll actually flag on. I had to turn the one off for the storm warning here because it was like every day I'd be getting, this clacks on, warning, big rain's coming. Yeah, that's like daily during the summer here. Minor floods, watch out. But you still get the warnings. But that thing will go off if the emergency broadcast system gets fired off for something that's out of the ordinary. Then I keep that on, and it's just on and on the background. So that helps you be aware. Even at 3 a.m., that thing will go off if there's some issue. And having some sort of basic survival plan, at least for a week, is prudent. Prudent. Um, Another thing that prompts this conversation was something I learned about moving here with AT&T Fiber. So AT&T Fiber is actually a fantastic swift service. I love AT&T Fiber. It is so much better than Spectrum, which is, cable internet is used. It's built on 1970s, 1980s, copper technology that they kind of fudged around to make be an internet broadcast service. Fiber optic internet is specifically designed to be using communication technology. Now, fiber is much more sensitive. The cords can't bend very long, or very, very sharp. It's very easy to break them. They're expensive. And when I had it at my old house, the line kept getting cut by the yard maintenance because they here in this state, in this climate, as part of the maintenance, they aerate the lawn, which is to punch holes into the lawn, uh, 2 or 3 inches deep or something like that, to allow the water to get through, and allow the roots to breathe and all that other stuff. Well, they generally don't bury those lines very well when they hook that stuff in your house, and it cuts those cables. Those cables aren't cheap. I don't know how they stay in business, honestly, with how often those cables get cut, because I see it every season during when I'd walk down the neighborhood, see all sorts of temporary lines where the cords got cut. Guys, bury it a little deeper, be a little smarter about how you install this stuff. Um, but anyway, um, the new AT&T devices are all in one. They're this kind of book-sized modem device, and it has Wi-Fi capability, and it has basically 4 ports in the background. You can set up your home network very simply with this thing, and it has some configuration options, but it's pretty straightforward, right? Good for most people. But one of the things that drives me nuts, boy, it drives me absolutely crazy, is ads and tracking software, and browser tracking and all that other stuff, right? I hate being just profiled and monitored and pitched to all the damn time. And I have a TV that I bought last year. It's a 65-inch TV, a Samsung 65-inch TV that I got for $420 or something at Sam's Club. Okay, and so it's not the best TV you can buy for the size, but for the price, excellent piece of hardware. Well, of course, when the product is free, you are the product. So you have to go deep in the settings of this television, because when you go onto the home screen, you're getting hit with advertisements. And if you go into the settings of the application, you would find deep in there how to turn off all the tracking, all the ads and stuff like that. I opt out, I opt out, I opt out, I opt out. And every now and again, they would update the operating system and it flips all that stuff back on. And finally, this newest update, which did a full-on update of my TV, I was like, oh, that was not expected. The whole interface is different. It improved it a little bit. It makes it a little easier to switch to my PlayStation. But now you can't turn off the ads, okay, on this device directly. Annoying. Well, for years and years, one of the things that I've done for my PCs is there's something called a hosts file that you can download from a site that's been up for almost 30 years now. Win2000.com is what it is. I don't make any money. I don't think they make any money, but I will plug them. I don't know why they do it. But what a host file is in Windows is that it overrides any other internet address resolution that you get to your computer, and points to a hard-coded IP address, the number of the machine that you're trying to talk to. And so the way that works, not to get terribly technical, but if you go to someplace like Amazon.com, for example, Amazon.com is just a string of text. And what happens is if your computer doesn't know where the address of Amazon.com is, it does what's called DNS resolution, domain naming service. And it's a service that's provided by various ISPs or whatever. And it's a core function of the internet where, hey, I don't know what this address is. I go talk to this server and get the address and say, hey, I'm trying to find these guys. What's the address for it? And the server will give a response. It says, oh, you want to talk to the IP, 23.55. whatever, right? And then your machine knows where to go. Well, these DNS services, as you can imagine now, what this has happened is they use that information to track your behavior and to profile you. Hey, he's going to Amazon all the time. He's going to Nordstrom all the time. Okay, let's pitch him Nordstrom stuff. Let's pitch him whatever, right? And of course, not that I'm concerned about it, but that's information that can be turned over to the feds because they collect it. It's not private information. So, don't do anything illegal, but they collect that information to profile you and figure you out with your DNS resolution. Okay. So two things you can do to help reduce the noise on your network is to put in a host file that has basically what's called a blacklist. It's a list of servers and resolution addresses that you know of, and you tell it to point back to what's called the loopback adapter, a specific, very special IP address, 127.0.0.1. And what that is the computer trying to talk to itself on its networking address, on its own network. And that is true of every computer. That is called the loopback adapter. And what that does is when the computer is getting told, go to add track dot whatever, it tries to resolve it on its own machine and says, I can't find it. And so that traffic just doesn't go through. So when you open up a web page and you get all those ads and all those things that pop up, none of that stuff is working on your computer, because when it tries to resolve that stuff, it just talks to itself. It says, this doesn't exist. And so it doesn't present it, right? And then the other thing you can do is point to DNS servers that are essentially ad block servers that do the same kind of stuff for you, but you don't have to do it manually, and it can do it for any device. You're just basically saying, okay, here's a list of stuff that I don't want to see. Let's, whatever, that they maintain. They maintain that blacklist. So you have to trust that DNS service not to be, and of course they can still track you and all that other stuff, but it reduces the noise from stuff that you don't have blacklisted on your own independent machines, or if the machine that you're working with doesn't have the ability to do that. That is an increasing common feature. Because what I found with AT&T Fiber is normally what you can do is you can change the DNS settings of any device that has a relatively complex user interface to specify which DNS addresses that it's going to without getting rid of the dynamic stuff that assigns the machines its own IPs. That is called DHCP, Dynamic Host Control Protocol. Is when you plug a computer in, if usually the default setting is to use DHCP, it sends a ping out onto the network. It says, hey, I don't have an address, give me one. I need one. And there's a service on, usually on your modem, on your router in your home, that says, "Oh, a new device is trying to talk on the internet. I've got this whole range that I can give out to you. Here, take one." And then once the machine gets its IP, then it can talk on the network directly. You can override the DNS settings that can be handed out by DHCP, because you can usually control that from your router, from your, the DHCP service on whatever device is doing that on your network. You can override whatever it's telling, whatever it gets back. You can override it with a hard coded number for a server that you're aware of. That doesn't work on AT&T's equipment. They don't allow you to resolve DNS with another resource, because what happens is the IP that you're the DNS service that is being hosted on that equipment is hosted actually on your router. It's doing some sort of connection to kind of bridge that DNS gap, so everything is hosted here. You can't override it. Not with standard DHCP equipment. So with the combination of the fact that this new interface that they provided my television, and with my new internet service that doesn't allow me to specify anything about my name resolution on that TV, the ads are coming through. And it makes me really angry about that. I bought this TV. I'm just going to the home screen so I can select which device or which service I'm going to use. I don't want to get hammered with ads there. And what set me on fire most recently, I turn on my TV and it's a Progressive insurance ad, just right in your face. It dominates the screen, and it's these two people with their mouths agape, laughing at each other in some weird way, and just it made me irrationally angry to look at it. I do not want this advertisement when I turn on my television. I did not turn on my television to get immediately hammered with a Progressive insurance ad or any ad. I just want to use my TV. Okay. So because my network device could not actually handle what the simple thing that I wanted it to do, which was to allow me to, at least on my TV, have it point to a DNS server that does not allow for ads to get directed, I bought a special router, a special new device. And what I did was I configured my AT&T router to be what's called a pass-through router. And what that does is it just says, okay, whatever first device connects, that is the only one I'm going to talk to. And I'm going to hand all the information about internet configuration over to this other device. So you can just basically turn this fiber optic device, this powerful router piece of equipment that you do not need to replace from its technical capabilities, because they've locked it down, I turn into a stupid pass-through device that just converts the fiber optic into an Ethernet connection. That's basically all it's doing with this configuration. And you can lock it down so that you can say that the hardware address, the actual physical device address, is the only one that can connect there. So it really makes it very secure. At this point, this thing cannot be accessed by anything. You can still turn on the Wi-Fi, not a good idea. But in any case, you turn that off and turn it dumb and pass on to this other custom router. Now these custom routers, it's another device, and this particular device has way more configuration stuff than I will ever know what to do with. But two things that it does for you. One is it does allow you to say, hey, I'm going to specify the DNS servers that any device on this network is going to get, and I'm going to redirect them to this other resolution service. So I point it to an ad block service. I think the name of the service that runs it is AdAware, I think is the name of it. So any of the devices on my network now, anytime they are trying to talk to something that is trying to advertise to me, suddenly it's not able to do so. And then the other thing that it does, and this is something new for me, is it actually can install software. And one of the pieces of software you can add is an ad block software, also by AdAware. And that's also, it not only does whitelisting, so you don't actually have to configure the DNS server. I just prefer to make sure that happens. But it also is aware of tracking type software and tracking type traffic and cuts it off. When I got that all configured and turned on, my browsing experience sped up dramatically, and the noise on my network declined dramatically, and the number of strange devices that my other security software kept seeing trying to talk on my network disappeared almost completely. It is incredible how much telemetry, how much tracking, how much advertising, how much all this other junk just from standard software. I have a couple Windows machines, I have a television, I have some Amazon, Echo devices on the network. It's not a crazy network, and it's loud on my network when I have it open to the standard stuff that AT&T lets go through. And the reason they lock that down is probably because they got some sort of handshake deal where the ad traffic can go through. So you're paying for your internet service. In my case, it's $70 a month or something, pricey, but I work out of this and I game and all that other stuff. It's probably the best bang for the buck out of any utility I get. Forget water. uh, so you're paying for this service, and all that traffic that's coming across it and they're aware of it is meant to track you. And they're not only doing that, they're gathering your information, whatever type of thing that you're looking for, and figuring out the kind of stuff you like and profiling you and probably selling that off to other people as well. I don't like that, man. I'm already paying. I don't want to use bandwidth that I'm not using. I don't want to use to have my information kept and tracked and sold, especially if I'm not being compensated, especially if I'm paying for it. You know what I mean? It's pervasive and insistent, and it's always knocking at your door. It drives me crazy. And the proof in the pudding of the fact that I just have a filter, essentially, on my network that just prevents certain crummy sites from just being talked to has made my browsing experience, my television experience, all that other stuff so much better. And every now and again, someone will show me the YouTube app, or I will also use Brave browser, which has a bunch of ad block stuff in it. Very few people know about this. It is a Chromium based browser. It's compatible with almost everything, and it's easy to use, and it blocks a lot of ad and tracking traffic. That's all it does. It makes things so much easier, because when I open something up in Edge or something that's not filtered, I don't have any plugins on that, but sometimes I do have to use it because some sites just straight up won't work without all their junk, right? You go to the site and you're just annihilated with ads. YouTube, you're getting interrupted every 30 seconds, every minute, every 2 minutes, whatever it is that people are using that application. Unless they pay for the premium version, which is ironic because the advertisers are paying to stream to you, and then you have to pay to block the ads, and then now the advertisers pay a premium to make sure that some ads get through, even though you're paying. So you got to pay premium plus whatever. I already did that to Amazon Prime. You know, ah, I have to pay $5 a month to not get ads. I'm just not going to watch TV on your stuff anymore. It's kind of how I look at it. It's very rare that I watch Amazon anyway. I don't want to get annihilated with ads. When I do, I pay $100 a year, $130 or whatever it is now a year for that service. I shouldn't have to get ads, is how I feel. You know, find some other way to pitch to me that I actually welcome. Stop making cold calls in my house. The experience that people have on the internet, if they're not using ad blocks, if they're not taking these kinds of measures, I don't know how people are actually doing it, to be honest with you. I find I am incredibly frustrated and unable to enjoy anything on the internet unless I'm filtering that content. And I don't watch YouTube on the app for that reason. I browse the internet using a ad block browser no matter where I am. And now I have a network that has it filtered coming into the house. And now my experience is better. And I imagine, in a strange way, just like cleaning your water and cleaning your air, it's probably healthier too. It's all stuff that you actually want to see. You're not being continually distracted with something that's trying to get you to buy something or do something or feel inadequate or whatever. Because that's kind of the other part of the story there about advertisement and marketing in general is you don't know you have something wrong with you until they tell you, and then here's the product to fix it or the service to fix it or whatever, it's, I didn't know I had a problem, but now I feel anxious and now I got to go pay money. They're doing that to you constantly, and I don't appreciate it. And I'm glad that we still have options to prevent it, but you got to get more and more aggressive about how you defend yourself against these unwanted inclusions in the media you consume. And so, anyway, it's a bit technical to do this sort of thing, but it's worth the investment of energy and a little bit of money, I think. If you're ever thinking about how much you're getting annihilated by this stuff in your home, watching TV or whatever, uh, to consider spending. I spent $160 on this device. I think they're on sale for 130. Again, I don't make any money, I'm not pitching anybody or whatever, but this router, these modern routers, which was suggested to me by AI, works great. Works great. And it's not too complicated to do. You turn the ad block software on. That's probably good enough for everything you need to do. The other thing you have to do is configure your modem, and no one's going to help you do that at AT&T. They don't want you to do that. So you have to know what you're doing. Now, the instructions are pretty clear when you look it up, but the problem, of course, is if you kill your internet, it's hard to get the information. So, and I'm tempted to experiment with this router. There's all sorts of fun things in there, but I'm like, the network's working. You better not monkey with it. But so just to kind of sum it up, I know it's a little weird, and it isn't. It feels like an unnecessary expense to be filtering your air, filtering your water, and all that other stuff. And don't get me wrong, I know that a lot of people that do this stuff, they're pretty extreme. They're like, oh, look, this is got to keep the mind altering government chemicals out of the water or whatever. That's not quite how I look at it, but it is true that stuff gets into the water, put there by people, or it just falls in there, dead animal or whatever, that the chlorine can take care of, but it's not good for your body either. It's killing living things, and you're a living thing, and you don't need chlorine in your system. You do not. That is not, I mean, there's probably some trace amount that we have to have, but not as much as they're putting in the water. Fluoride you don't need. You can get it through your toothpaste and spit it out. You get a little trace amount from what you swallow. You don't need to drink it. You don't need to drink it. It's not good for you. And all sorts of other things that can, all the pharmaceuticals that get in the water supply that they talk about. Now, I'm also not a purist. I drink soda out of bottles, and one of the things I do though is I do, when I have water, I use a metal container, clean metal container, that's BPA free and all that other stuff. It's actually metal. It's not BPA. It's not plastics, because plastics are bad for you too. Plastics are particularly bad for men. Okay, uh, because, and this is not conspiracy theory, this is study shows, is that this chemicals that are in there replicate estrogen, and they lower your T count and stuff, and how material is that on you? It's hard to say, but it's a factor. And so the more you can cut plastic out of your life, especially microwaving things in plastic, and using cheap plastic containers to, I see people with like, milk jugs and stuff they would drink their water with. Don't use that. Spend a little money and get a high quality reusable container, so you're not taking on that plastic into your body, right? And that's part of the filtration stuff, is you remove it where you can. You're not going to be immune to it. You go out to a restaurant, they're not using filtered water. They might have a basic filter on it or whatever. You're like refrigerator filter, and that's good enough a lot of the time, just to get rid of the crazy junk. Um, but just as a matter of simple health and sanitation, it's just a good idea. It's a good investment to have your living space have relatively clean air, to have the water that's going into your body, at least at home, is clean. And if you can, with your internet, with your media, clean that stuff up as well. You gotta fight the fight where you can in the ways that you can. And still recognize that it's not going to be a perfect experience. But if you're spending most of your time at home, as I do, working and then hanging out, uh, sleeping and everything else, your quality of life will be better. So anyway, that's my little preach for the day. Filter your stuff. It's good for you, I promise. Um, and if you ever want to know a little bit more about it, I'm always happy to talk about it. Okay, that's me.